Countering crisis, West African leaders are in Washington mapping out a strategy against Ebola. Unrest reignited, a Catholic response to growing racial tensions in the St. Louis area. Inside the Synod, we'll hear from a high-ranking Vatican official who's in the mix. And a good bet, the odds favor a Nobel Peace Prize for Pope Francis. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, October 9th, 2014. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Leaders from around the world strategize here in Washington today, hoping to make progress in the fight against Ebola. Jason Calvi is joining us now covering that story.
You know, Brian, Ebola has infected 8,000 people, killing 3,800. That's the latest numbers from the World Health Organization. Most of the deaths have been in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And UNICEF says the number of orphans left behind could double by the middle of the month. Kids orphaned by Ebola. These 3 children are shunned, living alone in a shack in Monrovia, Liberia.
If I go somewhere, they spray the chair. They wash it and spray it before they'll sit on it. Nobody will take our money. We stay here by ourselves.
UNICEF estimates at least 3,700 children lost a parent because of the deadly disease. Ebola was the focus of a summit at the World Bank in Washington today.
Many businesses have been shut down, have shut down their operation. Farmers are unable to harvest crops.
In the 30 years I've been working in public health, the only thing like this has been AIDS. And we have to work now so that this is not the world's next AIDS.
Presidents of the 3 worst affected nations pleaded for help.
We need qualified and dedicated staff to join the fight against Ebola.
There are still major challenges. We have limited technical and financial capacities to take the major action that has to be taken to contain the disease.
The World Bank says if the disease isn't stopped, its disruptions and effects could cost more than $32 billion through next year. And the African leaders say they need more international engagement, not less.
Restrictions imposed on air and sea travel resulted in increased cost of travel and increased commodity prices affecting the poor.
But more help is now in the epicenter of the Ebola crisis, Liberia. About 100 additional American troops are now in the country with a total commitment of about 4,000 preparing to deploy there. Brian, they're setting up emergency medical centers and sometimes in very remote locations as well.
All right, thank you. Jason Calvi reporting tonight. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Stocks plunged today in one of the market's steepest declines in 3 years. The Dow sank 334 points, closing at 16,659. The S&P 500 lost 40 points, or about 2%, closing at 1928. The NASDAQ dropped also around 2%, 90 points to 43.78. Energy stocks took a major hit today with the price of oil slumping. The market hasn't been this volatile since around August 2011. That's when the U.S. government lost its AAA credit rating. The Vatican official in charge of annulment says he is exploring ways to streamline that process. Cardinal Francesco Coccopalmiero told reporters today the current process with church courts is complicated, long, and can be expensive, and he wants to see that changed. Some dioceses don't have tribunals in places to handle annulments. The cardinal says reform might include giving bishops the power to declare a marriage null in certain cases. He says another step could be reducing the number of people required to approve an annulment. To encourage more open discussion at this Synod on the Family, the Vatican isn't releasing printed summaries of bishops' remarks to the press. Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, head of the Vatican's Doctrine Office, says he disagrees with this new policy.
All Christians have the right to be informed about the intervention of their bishops.
Vatican spokesman have daily briefings summarizing the debate, but without saying who says what. We'll have more on the Synod a little bit later. West Virginia's Attorney General says his office will no longer fight a court challenge to that state's ban on same-sex couples legally marrying. The High Court declined to review lower court rulings, striking down same-sex marriage bans in several states on Monday. Meanwhile, South Carolina's Supreme Court is ordering state probate courts not to issue same-sex marriage licenses. The order is in effect until a federal judge decides whether that state's constitution's ban on the unions is legal. Well, one lawmaker is calling it a clear case of racial profiling, but St. Louis police say the young man killed last night was armed and fired shots at an off-duty officer. That shooting has outraged a community that's already on edge. Overnight, protests erupt in St. Louis. Angry residents charging at police, kicking at police cars, shattering windows, and shouting for police to leave their neighborhood. All in response to an 18-year-old black man who was shot and killed by an off-duty St. Louis police officer Wednesday night.
How y'all just killed that little boy? Y'all not finished killing people's babies?
According to the St. Louis Police Department, the 32-year-old officer, a white male, and 6-year veteran of the force, was off-duty in uniform working for a security agency on neighborhood patrol when he came across 3 black men who started running from the officer's vehicle, and eventually one of them firing shots at the officer.
A police officer tonight chased an individual who was armed with a gun. The individual shot at the officer at least 3 times, and the officer returned fire.
Authorities confirmed the officer shot at the suspect 17 times. The officer was not hurt, and police say a 9mm gun was recovered from the scene. This shooting happened just 10 miles from where Michael Brown was shot 2 months ago, and just ahead of a weekend of resistance in St. Louis, where activists will push for movement in the investigation into that case. All this as demonstrations continue in a community already reeling and seeking answers to another young man's death.
Think about your own child.
So a prayer service was already planned at Blessed Teresa of Calcutta Parish in Ferguson tonight. Organizers of that service tell us last night's shooting shows an even greater need to address underlying problems in their community. They say those problems include economic justice, racism, and educational opportunities. There are some new allegations tonight about the White House possibly covering up facts involving a Secret Service scandal. The Washington Post first reported a White House volunteer may have hired a prostitute while on a 2012 presidential trip to Colombia. Agents and military personnel on that trip were disciplined for similar charges. The Post article says investigators were pressured to edit their report, cutting out certain details. Congressman Jason Chaffetz has been reviewing the Secret Service records for poor behavior. He says he tends to believe these news reports based on his conversations with some whistleblowers. The White House insists an internal review found no one on its staff behaved inappropriately. Well, as strikes continue to pound ISIS forces in North Syria in an effort to keep a border town out of terrorist hands, the U.S. and coalition forces launched about 5 bombing runs, airstrikes near Kobani today. The U.S. military says they've destroyed vehicles, a support building, and an ISIS training camp. But the Pentagon says air power won't be enough to stop these militants. Kurdish forces battling ISIS have tried to take advantage of the airstrikes to move in reinforcements. The awarding of Nobel Prizes continues today. It is the prize for literature today. Francis Patrick Modiano is this year's winner. Critics say his writing offers unique insights into Europe and France during the Nazi occupation. Little of his work has been translated into other languages, which is often the case with past Nobel winners. Winning this prize is a big boost to the authors. He'll also collect $1.1 million. Of the Nobel Awards presented this week, the most popular is the Nobel Peace Prize. The awards committee announces that winner tomorrow. Many say Pope Francis is the odds-on favorite. Wyatt Goolsby is here with that story. Wyatt?
Brian, if he does win, it would be historic. Francis could be the first pope to win the Nobel Peace Prize. In fact, some of the world's leading bookmakers are placing their bets on the Holy Father, literally. For millions of the faithful, it's hard to picture a better model of compassion and empathy worldwide than Pope Francis. That's why some bookies say he's the 7-4 favorite to win the Peace Prize. That's right, 7-4. Alongside the sporting bets, one of the leading UK bookmakers, William Hill, says the smart money is on Francis.
Well, we take information throughout the year to help price up the markets. We constantly update the betting on different occurrences throughout the year. Because a lot of people have invested on Pope Francis winning this year's Nobel Peace Prize, his price has reduced as a result.
Other top picks include UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, and Pakistani education advocate Malala Yousafzai. The Catholic Church advises the faithful to be careful of excessive gambling. But whether or not he's the winner, many say Francis has built a huge following since his election, appealing to people of different faiths and cultures.
He is someone who is happy to go and sit in the canteen at the Vatican and sit with people who are cleaning the floors. He's not somebody who is going out and trying to be Pope who is above everybody. He is just another man. He is a humble Pope.
If he does win, Francis would join a long list of Catholics who have won a Nobel Prize, including Mother Teresa in 1979 and Bishop Carlos Bello of East Timor in 1996. What will likely stand out are his efforts to end the conflict in the Middle East, visiting the Holy Land and hosting the Israeli and Palestinian presidents in a high-level prayer summit. Despite all the bets, there's no guarantee Pope Francis will win. There could always be a surprise winner like Barack Obama was in 2009. The Nobel Committee in Norway remains tight-lipped, only saying that they have received a record 278 nominations. And so, Brian, we will find out if Pope Francis wins early tomorrow morning.
Well, I'm not a betting man, Wyatt, but I'd say that's a safe bet. Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. Coming up, believe it or not, CatholicMatch.com is covering the Synod on the Family. We talk with their blogger. And a Wisconsin couple plans to take the Synod experience home to La Crosse, leading by their example. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and this is EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, October 9th. Ed Morrissey, the senior editor for the Hot Air blog, is blogging for the dating website CatholicMatch.com from the Synod in Rome. Ed joining us from the Eternal City. Why is Catholic Match interested in this Vatican meeting, Ed?
Well, I think that the big question here is going to be preparing people for marriage and preparing people for family life. And there is really no better audience for that type of ministry than the people who are coming to Catholic Match. I mean, these are the people who want to build Catholic families. And to see that the Synod is focusing on that, I think, is a real inspiration for them.
Certainly it is. So these are people who are either dating or courting one another, hopefully with marriage in mind. Have you heard or seen anything yet at the Synod that would really directly affect them or be of interest to them?
Well, I think so. I think what you're going to see out of the Synod is that there's a big push here to really expand marriage enrichment programs, marriage preparation programs, and to really firm up the catechesis on what marriage actually means. And I think that they're going to find that the Catholic Church is going to have a lot more resources for them in the near future because of this effort.
Now, this is your first Synod. Is it what you expected? What's your overall impression of this Synod?
It is a bit what I expected. I do have to say, I think it's been really fascinating to hear some of the recaps given in the press briefings each day. And I was really encouraged this morning. I got a chance to be in the prayer service this morning. Very encouraged by the collegiality, the joy, the optimism that I saw expressed among the bishops as they were gathering there. I think maybe that's something I didn't expect to see, and it really has been inspiring.
Sounds like a very positive experience, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. Ed Morrissey, the Hot Air senior editor, blogging for the dating website CatholicMatch.com from Rome. Thanks for joining us. An American couple from Wisconsin addressed the Pope and bishops at the Synod on the Family this week. They say their takeaway from the Synod is to lead by example and encourage others to do the same.
What I hope to do when I get back is to if you will, call the men forward, call the fathers forward, the fathers to be, the grandfathers and the great-grandfathers, and really challenge them to come forward and to take on their role as faith leaders with their families.
So we have to be patient with our families. We have to be relating to them. We have to, walk with them on their journey, not say, here's my journey, walk with me.
The Heinzens are one of 14 non-voting married couples giving testimony at the Synod this week. Well, this Saturday marks International Day of the Girl Child. It's a day recognizing the challenges facing girls all over the world. Reggie Littlejohn, president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, joins us, and you speak all over the world about China's one-child policy, even meeting with Pope Francis about this. Is there enough international support to address this travesty?
Actually, we really need a lot more support. We are building a movement to end forced abortion and sexual slavery in China, and I have spoken at the European Parliament, the British Parliament, Irish Parliament, the Vatican, the White House, U.S. Congress, and the support is building and is growing. But we really need to have a major international movement to deal with this major international problem.
So the issue of abortion often divides people by party line. Do you see more bipartisan support against gendercide and sex-selective abortions like happens in China and some other countries?
Well, the thing is that no one supports forced abortion because it's not a choice. So this is an opportunity for pro-choice and pro-life to agree on something, that women should not be forced to abort, which is what happens in China, government-enforced abortions. And another thing that I think that everyone can agree on is that the selective termination of baby girls is an appalling fact of our time. According to one UN estimate, there were up to 200 million baby girls that were selectively aborted in China and India and also all over the world.
Well, India is one of it is the largest democracy in the world, so this is an issue in India too.
Yes, the difference between China and India is that in China you have government-enforced abortion if a woman doesn't have a birth permit. This is unique to China. What China and India share is son preference, so that in both cultures women are pressured to abort or abandon their baby girls.
How can a society continue to exist without women, without girls?
Well, with great difficulty. And in China and India, both of them, they have approximately 37 million more men living than women. And what this is doing is it is driving human trafficking and sexual slavery within those countries and also from the surrounding nations as well.
So the girls who get to live in these countries are often subjected to a terrible life, it sounds like.
Well, it depends. In China, if a family decides that they're going to have their only child, it's going to be a girl, then usually that girl has a lot of opportunities because she's the only child. But where we run into problems is especially in the countryside, where everybody wants at least one boy. So if your first child is a girl, you can have a second child, and many people consider that to be their last chance to have a boy. So it's on the second girl child that we see this tremendous gendercide, the wholesale termination of baby girls.
It's so depressing to think about it. Are we making any progress? Is there hope here?
Well, there's hope on two fronts. We have an international advocacy campaign, and both the European Parliament and the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women have issued statements condemning coercive birth control, forced abortion, forced sterilization, forced contraception. But where we have not seen that support has been on gendercide, the selective abortion of baby girls, because I think they don't realize, they think that this is a woman's choice, right to choose. And what they don't realize is that most women who are committing gendercide actually are not choosing, they are forced. So that's why we have this Save a Girl campaign, where we are going around and through our network of field workers, we are saving individual baby girls one by one.
And thank you for the good work you do. Women's Rights Without Frontiers. Reggie Littlejohn, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, how much do you give to charity? We talk with an expert about helping those less fortunate. And a trip back in time, opening a unique link to life in New York City 100 years ago. We appreciate you being with us on this Thursday, October 9th. I'm Brian Patrick. And a new study from the Chronicle of Philanthropy out this week found poor and middle-income Americans give a higher percentage of their income to charity than the wealthy. Analysis of IRS data shows Americans earning more than $200,000 cut their share of charitable giving by slightly more than 4.5% between 2006 and 2012. Americans earning less than $100,000 gave 4.5% more of their income to charity during that same period. The report shows wealthy donors are more focused on supporting the arts and higher education. Lower income earners are more likely to give to social charities. Robert Doar is the Mortgage Fellow in Poverty Studies at American Enterprise Institute. So with the wealthy cutting back the percentage of what they're giving, what does that mean for the poor?
Well, it's hard to measure that, but what we can measure is that the poor and struggling Americans are not doing any better. In the last 3 years, we've stuck at about 45 million Americans classified as poor. It's not budged down. And the sad part about that is we've done better in the past. There have been years when those numbers have been lower, the percentages have been lower, both for children, for blacks, for whites, for all Americans. And we need to get back to policies that can help the poor raise their incomes, get into work, and support their families.
I was a kid when President Johnson launched the war on poverty, a war we seem to be losing. Now, you administered public assistance programs in New York under Mayor Bloomberg. How do you think we should fight poverty?
The most important ingredient is getting people into work, getting them jobs, getting them into employment. Only 2.7% of everybody classified as poor worked full-time last year. More than 60% of the people that are classified as poor didn't work 1 week. What has worked in the past, what will work in the future, is if we can get jobs created, get people in programs that are directing people into employment as rapidly as possible.
So obviously we all can give what we can, but how can everyday Americans help besides donating to charitable causes?
Well, they can support policies that encourage work. They can also talk about the importance of marriage. There isn't any question that children are much more likely to be poor and to have bad outcomes in school and with the criminal justice system if they're raised in single-parent or never-married families. Families with 2 married parents engaged and involved in their children's lives are far less likely to be poor. So individuals and Americans can talk about that and talk about that as being an important issue in the anti-poverty fight.
Very important point. And I wonder, too, for those of us who do give to charities, can we strategize our charity giving to make sure that it's used right?
Yes, I'm a big believer in looking at the outcomes for the programs you give to. How many people got jobs who participated in the program? How many people stayed in those jobs after they were there, and what were the wages that they got that got them? When you give money to programs, you want to know that they have good outcomes. It's not how much we spend, it's how well we do in the programs to help people who are poor.
And there are these types of programs. Are they easy to find?
Yes, there are. And I think programs particularly that are focused on young men who are the most disconnected from the workforce right now, particularly young men of color in the cities. We need to really focus on those who have been most left out. And the sad part about the last 6 years is that young men have fallen further behind in the inner cities, and we really need to get that turned around, or we're not going to be able to really help poor children.
From the American Enterprise Institute, Robert Doar, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, finally tonight, we leave you with a bit of history, just unsealed, rediscovered, if you will. This time capsule was opened last night in Manhattan. It was locked up 100 years ago by a Wall Street businessman. Some items inside include newspapers and other notes from 1914, highlighting New York's history as a commercial powerhouse. There was even a telegram from the governor at that time to his counterpart in the future. One historian that helped unpack the capsule says it gives a unique link to the past.
One of the most beautiful time capsules I've seen, bronze, very ornate, and it gives a kind of sense of a connection to the past, which we don't get really from other media. This is a direct connection to people who sealed it and hammered in the nails 100 years ago.
Interesting point. This capsule was supposed to be sealed for only 60 years. The group responsible for its safekeeping apparently forgot about the 1974 deadline, so it was finally opened 100 years after it was buried. That's it for tonight. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching tonight. And as we say goodbye, we bid farewell to a dear friend of EWTN, Father Benedict Groeschel. A prayer vigil is about to begin at Newark's Cathedral Basilica of the Sacred Heart. Stay with EWTN for a live broadcast of the vigil. Tomorrow's Mass of Christian Burial at 11 a.m. Eastern will also be live here on EWTN. Farewell, Father Groeschel. May you rest in peace.